Zara lived in a quiet town, surrounded by rolling hills and gardens. The sun shone brightly most days, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers through her small house. She loved her life there, but deep down, she wanted something more. Zara had always been curious about the world outside her town, and she believed that learning English could help her connect with people from faraway places. Her dream started small. Zara often watched English TV shows, especially comedies. Everyone laughed at the jokes, but she couldn't understand a word. She wanted to laugh for real, not just because others were laughing. One day, during morning assembly at school, her teacher made an announcement. "We will have a special English speech contest in 3 months," said Mr. Kumar, a kind but strict man with glasses perched on his nose. "Anyone who wants to participate should give me their names by tomorrow." Zara felt her heart race. The thought of speaking English in front of a crowd terrified her, but then a spark lit up in her mind. This was her chance to learn English and to prove to herself that she could do it. That evening, she sat on her bed with her fluffy white dog, Max, lying beside her. "Max," she said, stroking his fur, "I've decided. I'm going to learn English. Will you help me?" Max tilted his head and wagged his tail as if to say, "Of course." Zara's journey began the next day. She borrowed an English alphabet chart from her school library and pinned it to the wall of her room. Every morning she would point to each letter and say it out loud, A, B, C, D. At first, the sounds felt strange on her tongue, but she kept practicing, even when she made mistakes. By the end of the week, she could recite all 26 letters without looking at the chart. Feeling proud, Zara decided to move on to words. She downloaded a free language app on her old smartphone. The app introduced her to simple words like apple, cat, and sun. Each time she guessed a word correctly in one of the games, the app made a cheerful ding sound. Max would bark in excitement whenever he heard it. One evening, Zara tried making her first sentence. She looked at Max and said, "Max is cute." Max barked and wagged his tail as if agreeing. Zara clapped her hands. "I did it! I made a sentence." Encouraged by her progress, she practiced every day. Sometimes she stumbled over tricky words like beautiful and Thursday, but she refused to give up. A few weeks into her journey, Zara hit a roadblock. She couldn't figure out how to pronounce certain words, and the app didn't always help. She felt frustrated and discouraged. One afternoon, as she was walking Max in the neighbourhood, she saw her elderly neighbour, Mrs. Collins, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea. Mrs. Collins had lived in England for many years before moving to their town. She was kind and always had a story to share. Zara hesitated for a moment, but then decided to approach her. "Mrs. Collins," Zara said shyly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear," Mrs. Collins replied with a warm smile. "I'm trying to learn English, but it's really hard. Can you help me?" Mrs. Collins's eyes lit up. "I'd be delighted to help. Why don't you come over tomorrow after school? We can practice together." The next day, Zara arrived at Mrs. Collins's house, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Mrs. Collins welcomed her with a tray of tea and biscuits. "Let's start with simple greetings," Mrs. Collins said. "For example, 'How are you?' and 'I am fine.'" Zara repeated after her, "How are you? I am fine." They practiced for an hour every day. Mrs. Collins also shared stories about her time in London. "Did you know that people in England love tea so much that they drink it even when it's raining?" she said with a laugh. Zara enjoyed these sessions. She learned new words and phrases, and Mrs. Collins' encouragement made her feel confident. Despite her progress, Zara faced many challenges. Pronunciation was one of the hardest parts. She often confused words that sounded similar, like read and read or live and leave. One evening, she practiced a sentence in front of Max. "I read a book yesterday." But when she said it out loud, it sounded like, "I read a book yesterday." Why does English have so many rules? She muttered in frustration. Mrs. Collins reassured her. English can be tricky, but you're doing wonderfully. Remember, every mistake is a step toward learning. Zara also struggled with shyness. She felt nervous speaking English in front of others, afraid they might laugh at her mistakes. But she kept practicing in front of Max, who always listened patiently. As the weeks went by, Zara grew more confident. She started speaking small phrases with her friends at school. One day, her friend Priya asked, "What are you doing after school?" Zara replied, "I am going to learn English." Priya smiled. "That's great, Zara. You're getting better." Hearing those words made Zara feel proud. 3 months passed quickly, and the day of the English speech contest finally arrived. Zara had written a short speech about her journey learning English. She practiced it many times in front of Max and Mrs. Collins. When it was her turn to speak, she walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. The audience seemed huge, and for a moment, she felt like running away. But then, she thought of all the people who had helped her, Mrs. Collins, her friends, and even Max. Taking a deep breath, she began, "Good morning, everyone. My name is Zara, and I want to tell you about my journey learning English." Her voice was steady, and she remembered every word she had practiced. By the time she finished, the audience clapped loudly. Zara felt a rush of happiness and relief. Though Zara didn't win first place in the contest, she felt like a winner. She had come so far from where she started. That evening, she sat with Max and said, "We did it, Max. I can speak English now." Max wagged his tail, as if to say, "I always knew you could."